What is DNS? DNS stands for Domain Name Systems or Domain Name Service. Both are correct. DNS is a protocol that translates human-readable names into computer-readable IP addresses. Computers can't understand human-readable names like host names and domain names. Domain names are the names of websites like google.com or reddit.com, and host names are names of devices on your network. For this video, we're going to describe what happens when you type a domain name into your browser and how DNS translates that name into a computer-readable IP address. So, you open up a web browser and type in google.com. What now? Your computer then has to find the corresponding IP address to www.google.com in order to send and receive information from that website. Your computer will then look in its local DNS cache for the A record or the quad A record, depending on whether it's IPv4 or IPv6. The quad A record and the A record hold the domain name and the IP address in a record that it can return to your computer and you can render the web page. But what if it doesn't have the A record or quad A record? Your computer will then query the recursive server. The recursive server is usually owned by your ISP, but it doesn't have to be. We'll get into recursive servers more in depth in a future video. So, your computer queries the recursive server, and the recursive server checks its DNS cache to see if it might have the A record or quad A record that you're looking for. If it doesn't, then it takes over from here and it goes out on the internet to find your A record. So then the recursive server queries the root name server. Now the root name servers are very important to the internet. They are the backbone of the internet. We'll get into them more in depth in a future video. But for now, all we need to know is that the root name server is actually going to hold the IP address for the top level domain server, not the A record. Even though it looks like we're looking for the A record, we're not looking for the A record. We're looking for the address to the top level domain server. And so the root name server responds with that address. It says, I don't know what the IP address that you're looking for is, but here's the address to the top level domain server for that top level domain, which is going to be .com, .net, .org, etc. Now this may seem like a lot, but it all takes place in milliseconds, so keep that in mind. So then the recursive server is going to query the top level domain server, and it's going to say, hey, what is the IP address for www.google.com? Now the top level domain server does not know what that IP address is, but it has the address to the authoritative domain server for that domain. So that's what it's going to send back. So then the recursive server is going to say, okay, and it's going to query the authoritative domain server, and it's going to say, what is the IP address for www.google.com? Well, the recursive server is going to get an answer this time. The authoritative domain server is going to say, hey, I have an A record for that domain. Here it is. And then it's going to send that A record to the recursive server. The recursive server is going to send that A record to your computer. And guess what happens next? Your computer is going to load the website, www.google.com. So that's a quick overview of how DNS works. Thanks for watching my video.